Hello everyone and welcome to the World Class Stand podcast. Our special guest today is former Rangers first team coach and also part of the City football group, Dr. Ceri Bowley. We'd like to thank all our subscribers for helping us reach our first milestone. So thank you for subscribing. And if you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy our content, leave us a like. And if you want to get involved in the debates, drop a comment in the comment section. Also, we have our store, and if you want to support us by buying some merch, grab yourself a mug, a hoodie, or a t-shirt from our store below, and it'll help support the channel. Hello everyone, and welcome to the World Class Stand podcast. Our special guest today is Dr. Ceri Bowley. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. So the first question we like to ask our guests is, what exactly is a world-class player, and what would your definition be?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? It's one that everyone kind of deliberates over. I think it's very opinion-led, but if I was to give some things, for me, it's about being probably the top 5 or 10% at what you do, but not just doing it, sustaining it. And I think that's the difference for me when you talk about the world-class players. They not only reach a level, but they sustain it over a number of years. So I'd go probably top 10% in their position. Yeah. And that gives you an idea of the type of players that you talk about. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to achieve, I don't think, world class.
Any current players in the Premier League that sort of reached that level at the moment?
Well, I think you'd have to look at some of City's guys. So when you think about people like Kyle Walker and the level that he's played at as a right back, for example, and sustained that for a number of years, not only at Spurs where he was still decent and probably one of the best in the league, but then to go to City and the other bit I suppose I didn't mention in the initial definition is being able to adapt. And what he's had to do to play under the way that Pep plays with his fullbacks is very, very different to what he did at Spurs, where he was traditionally a bomber,
do you mean
and down.
Inversion,
managing the ball in tight areas, man marking in the way that they man mark sometimes and they leave it with a 2 and a 3 at the back, things like that, and being able to adapt to that. And then also, like, you look at last year on the run to the Champions League final and you see the players that he's marking. And when you look at the Madrid game in particular, and you had arguably the most informed winger playing against him, who probably didn't get a sniff, if we're honest, across those 2 legs. And a lot of that was down to the way that Kyle Walker played against him and what he did. So I think you'd look at someone like that for sure. You'd have to say he would be up there. Mo Salah is probably an obvious one, right? He's probably one of the standout ones now. Done it over a number of years and continues to hit double figures plus in both goals and assists every season. That takes some doing, to be fair. Kane would have been the obvious other one before he left for Bayern.
To win a trophy.
For me, well, we'll see. But for me, he's the best centre forward in the world and the most complete in the world. Yeah, goal scoring, everything that he can do, linking play, or all of that. I think he's up there.
So you're going Kane over Haaland?
Yeah, for sure.
For those reasons,
for me.
Kane's passing game, his assists. Phenomenal, I will say.
Kane's
they've come on in the last 2 or 3 seasons even better as well. So.
But I think Haaland's a freak of nature. Some of the goals he scores and what he's able to do and how he's able to adapt in the penalty box is like, he probably scores goals that Kane doesn't score. Yeah. But Kane, in terms of efficiency in front of goal, but also the other stuff in terms of link play and, assists, being able to drop deep, being able to, when I look at him in the last 2 years at Spurs before going, everything went through him. Everything good about Tottenham was about him, in terms of the way that he played, what he saw, the passes he could see to find other people, all of that kind of stuff, and still go and score the goals he scored. That takes some doing. So he would have been the top one for me. And then probably my favourite player at the minute to watch is probably Phil Foden.
And you're going to say that,
just unbelievable talent. And of course, you've still got Kevin De Bruyne, and you can't dismiss him, a world class. So I'm not going to be able to mention all the ones in the Premier League.
There's a lot to choose from.
Because there's a lot. But they would be the ones that would like really stand out for me as being the leaders in terms of what they do and where they play.
Great.
Definitely. And one of the things that we talk about is longevity. Obviously, Haaland, he's still only very young, got plenty of career left ahead of him. For a world-class player, is there a minimum time period, would you say, that they have to prove themselves over to get that kind of world-class status?
Yeah, good question. Multiple seasons. It's hard to put a number on it because I think every position is different. So when we look at like player development from a goalkeeper's perspective, they probably start to play first team football a lot later than some other positions, maybe. They hit their peak later. We know that. So I think it's hard to put an exact number on it because it's so individual. And then the other thing, like when you think about a player like Kane, how many times he went out on loan before he actually played consistently in Tottenham's first team. So it's very, very difficult to be able to find a number. But I think sustaining it over multiple seasons, 3+ seasons, is probably my kind of start point to say, actually, this guy's at that level. Because there's a lot of talk about Bellingham at the moment, and he is unbelievable. Yeah. But let's see 3, 4, 5 years what it's like, because he's going to be, I think he's going to be better and more impactful. But it reminds me a bit of Dele Alli's story. And he was kind of on those fringes, but then fell away very quickly. And I'm not suggesting that's going to happen with Jude Bellingham at all. But let's give him that opportunity first before we overhype him, because
definitely
we jump on things very quickly as fans and as media and whatever else. We jump on it very quickly, but we also drop them very quickly when they have a bad game. So
it is easy to get carried away and get excited. Bellingham's been absolutely fantastic for Real Madrid, and he did. I think we did mention this before on a previous podcast. It seemed a strange decision retiring his shirts at Birmingham when he was like 18 years old. But, what he's gone on to do, you can arguably, he's got one of the best futures ahead of him. But there's variables in there such as injuries and stuff like that. You don't know how it's going to pan out, but the future looks very bright for him. Yeah.
Okay, so bit of a walk through your career and what you've been up to, and some just experiences of who and where you've worked, and a bit of a walk through there.
Okay, well, one of my first jobs out of uni was with you, so you might recall that in RCT 560. It was actually my second job, because I was in the Vale of Glamorgan briefly. So that was mainly around extracurricular activity from a sport perspective. And I think real good grounding in the fact that, one, you're trying to work with disengaged, which is a lot more difficult than working with people that are naturally engaged. So when you work in the game, then more often than not, players, coaches and the staff around football are quite engaged in what they're doing. So there's a lot of lessons in there, but also the part around like multiple stakeholders. So you have your stakeholders in a school, you have your stakeholders in a council and governing body and whatever else. So learning how to work with all of them. And then without forgetting the teams that you work in a local level and a regional level. So I think a lot of good grounding in terms of that role. Then it was off to the FA, so work governing body. It was a launch of a coach mentoring program, mainly around grassroots coaches, and I was fortunate to manage the Southwest as a region, so set that up really from scratch, recruit all of the team, manage the mentoring team, and obviously coach education goes with it, and also some coaching in the girls' national team structures. So that was really interesting. Come back to USW, led a football degree, supported and co-wrote some of the master's degree with Gav Chesterfield. 3 years or so here, worked with some of the academies alongside it in terms of consultancy roles and that kind of stuff, but also across multiple sports. So one of the things I wanted to do was go into environments that I wasn't so familiar and challenge myself around, right, how do I adapt here? How do I get to understand like the things I'm really big on, language, and how important terminology and language is in a high performance environment. So going into netball with the Welsh national team was one of them. And I always remember Nia was obviously one of the players who played football as well. So I used to speak to Nia in football. She talked to me in netball, and that's how I'd understand the language that I needed to use when I went to work with the players. It was as simple as that. So that was a really interesting journey. Table tennis, basketball, so multiple sports that I worked with coaches and players from that time. Then on to City Football Group, which was a phenomenal opportunity. Just over 3 years with City Football Group. We were 5 clubs, I think, when I started, 13 when I finished. I'm mainly around like methodology, recruiting coaches, developing coaches, working with academies, education for scouts, range of things really. The role that you go into, it starts as something, and then it kind of just morphs into many different things for what's needed.
So were you across the entire portfolio of clubs, or were you more specifically with a few of them and then dipped in and out?
Across them all, but obviously less work with Man City.
Right.
Pep didn't really need this Welsh boy to come in and help him with what Man City first team looks like. But the biggest thing for me was not to take what Pep does around the world, because he's a kind of brand, if you like, in himself. Yeah. And I don't believe in one copy and paste, but two, you have to protect an element of what Pep is and who he is, because arguably he'll have to work after City again. And it's not really fair to do that and download everything that he does and share it. But it was more aligning to, so via Cheeky mainly, the director of football, anything that I kind of observed, I'd put into some sort of framework or approach for the rest of the clubs, and I'd always share it back before delivering it so that they understood what was coming, because naturally they're the top of the tree. So if anything someone sees anywhere else, they're going to ask them. So I wanted them to be aware of what it was, but also try to be respectful in that way. But all the other clubs, yes. Recruiting the coaches, I think nearly every club before I left, barring two, because they were too new in, we'd done all the recruitment for coaches and technical staff, for some of them even sporting directors, some of them even academy directors. And yeah, it was about all of them, every single club, watch them every week, work with the coaches every week. It was a fascinating journey, to be fair. That was class. And then through that, I met Gio and ended up at Rangers for a short period of time, shorter than what I'd hoped when I went there, shorter than the plan when it was sold to me, but that's how it works in this game. Incredible experience again. And that for me was more about put yourself in the firing line, because I'd always kind of ridden this roller coaster with the City coaches, but I was never in the kind of spotlight of if it goes wrong, you're going to get it. If you're going to get the pressure from the fans, you're going to get that. If they lost, I felt it, and I always wanted them to do well, but I was never accountable really for them losing. I was accountable for the way they played, not for the outcome more in terms of what I was questioned on. So that was about getting that experience to make you more credible in the future, so that when you go back and recruit and manage and develop coaches in the future, you've been there and you know what it's like to be under that pressure. And let me tell you, it's pressure up there.
I bet.
So that was probably like, looking at your CV beforehand, that was like probably really stand out. Like, Rangers, massive club, but also, as you say, City, obviously big club as well. But being the first team coach at a club like Rangers, massive pressure cooker environment, and if you're not top, you're last. It feels like from the outside looking in, but going into that opportunity, that must have been a really proud moment for you, stepping out on the turf and just like feeling like you've got your first big opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's one of them where it was never the plan to be in a first team environment, because I didn't really plan that way, and I was more thinking about technical director. But it was a proud moment for a number of things. One, because it was Gio that asked me. And obviously he'd spent 6 months with us on a secondment after Feyenoord and seen enough value in the stuff that I did to ask. That's one. Or you think how big Rangers is when you grow up in the UK and the old firm and everything about the SPL. And, my hero growing up, my first one was Gaza, because he played for Spurs, but then he also played for Rangers. So I'd always had this kind of affinity to them. And there was two lads that lived on the street above me that were from Scotland and were massive Rangers fans growing up. So they always used to tell me how big the club was and teach me loads of songs and all that kind of stuff. So you kind of had this affinity to them. And of course, you look at them and what they are historically and everything. It's a huge club. But honestly, you don't appreciate what it is until you go in there. Yeah. So I thought, like, going through City, we had so many different clubs, so many different problems, so many different challenges. You think you've almost, I don't want to say seen it all, because that sounds really arrogant, but you almost think you've come across as many things as you can. You walk into that environment and it's totally different. But yeah, an amazing football club, amazing environment to be in. And that bit around arriving, I probably wasn't for me, but it was probably for other people around me. So like my kids, daughters especially, because the little one, boy's too young, but the daughters especially, that was like a big deal for them. Probably mum, dad, the kind of the arrival of getting to that level. And that is all then some of the stuff that you lose immediately when you leave the club. So that drive home from Glasgow after leaving the club is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. It's probably the toughest bit, but it comes with the territory. I've been there. The best thing was probably, we managed to do something in terms of qualifying for Champions League before I went, which was something that the club had been trying to do for a long time. So there's that moment. But yeah, it was an incredible opportunity. One I'll always be grateful for, and I'll always support the club. So I am a Rangers fan, and we still support them in our house. So that's how we are now.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to lose half our subscribers in Scotland, so we'll comment on that one.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, we're going to ask now, who's your biggest influence on your coaching style?
Wow. I think I'm not going to go down the road of a single person, because I think lots of things shape you and lots of people shape you. My earliest influence was definitely my dad. So dad was an A licensed coach throughout my whole kind of time growing up, and always worked at a decent level as a coach.
Did he work at Merthyr Town, was that right?
Yeah, he worked Merthyr Town.
Yeah.
But like before that, even when I was very young, before the Welsh Premier League and even at the start of it, Brecon Corries were one of the best clubs in the division just below. So they're a really good level. So he'd always been around it, and he was my first coach. So it always has that impact as well. A little bit of pressure because of the type of character and managing your son. But at the same time, like he was probably ahead of what a lot of coaches were at that time in the way they thought about the game and things. Probably should have done more, but didn't, because he stayed loyal to the area, and he was incredibly passionate about giving young kids an opportunity. So developed academy systems and development centres in Brecon and focused more on that, when he could have gone off and done other things. But that happened. So he had a big influence. But then when you think about, when you go through your career, like for different reasons, so some psychologists have had a really big influence. So Ian Mitchell, or Dr. Ian Mitchell, I should say, but Mitch has had a huge impact on me. I knew him when he played at Merthyr when I was a very young kid, then went to UWIC, as it was then, now Cardiff Met, of course. And then he supervised my PhD. He was Director of Studies before he went to Swansea, so he's had a really big impact, although not so much on-field coaching. He did coach me, but more from the psychology bit. He's had a huge impact on me. Ian Jeffries, another guy who worked here actually, taught me at FE College, but more from a strength and conditioning perspective. And so you can get an idea here about the way I view the role of a coach. It's the multidiscipline bit. So he had a huge impact on me from a kind of strength and conditioning perspective and physical preparation of players. And then when you walk into the group, it's hard not to be kind of inspired by some of the people that are there. So, Pep's the obvious one, and everyone always asks me about Pep. But you always kind of look to him and look at what he's doing. I do it now. I try and watch City and try and second guess what he's going to do next. And you can never second guess him, because the guy's an absolute genius in terms of what he sees. And his impact for me was more when I was at games. You watch him, and within 3 or 4 minutes of kickoff, he's whistling and he's changing something. And like that, for me, the best coaches in the world are the ones that can see the chaos through the chaos in the game. Anyone can put a practice on out there and plan a practice, but when it comes to actually, can you see it in the game and can you impact a game? He's the ultimate. I think he's the best of the best when it comes to that stuff. So there's a guy, Eric Mumbarts, French guy, but worked globally around the group. He's like one of the grandfathers of the game for me, but I used to love talking about methodology with him. And being French, he was very different in the fact that our style isn't really what you associate with French football. No disrespect to them, but it's quite different. It's the physicality and power, speed, and that kind of stuff, whereas we build up a little bit more. So he went against the grain a little bit of what Coach Ed and coaching was in France. But and I still speak to him now. Brian Eastick is another one, British guy, who's been around all the FA, lots of academies, first teams. So, a lot older than me, generationally older than me, but just an ability to kind of pick his brains and challenge thinking and that kind of stuff. So those guys, a lot of influence. And then you have obviously the ones that you work with every day. So Michel in Girona, Liam Manning, who's now at Bristol City, worked with him every day for quite some time. Des Buckingham, who's now at Oxford United, worked with him for a number of years. Patrick Isnobo, that was at Melbourne and went to Twitter. This is, I could name nearly all of them in terms of that
Did
influence.
You cross paths with Arteta? I can't remember when he went to
Arsenal.
He
was there. He was at City as Pep's assistant when I arrived. Had a couple of conversations, but nothing major. My main contact at City was always Cheeky. So everything I did was always via Cheeky. And that's for a number of reasons, really. One is to protect the environment there, because they're trying to win everything. They're playing every 3 days, so last thing they need is someone else that's like asking questions and wanting something or whatever. So you respect their time in what they're doing, but also because him and Pep, and I've said this on podcasts before, if you put them in 2 separate rooms and went into each room and asked them the same questions, you'd get almost the same answer.
Right.
that's how aligned they are and how they see the game and what they're looking for and everything. So it's no surprise that they're able to recruit the best players and help them to settle into what they're trying to achieve there. So I always went through him, and he was always brilliant with his time, took me to sessions, and I always went with him. So we went to watch first team that way, had the conversations with the first team staff, but he knew the right moment for that. Whereas when I reach out to them, not knowing exactly what their day is like every day, because I'm not involved in it every day, it's hard to pick the right moment. And the last thing you want to do is pick the wrong moment with a coach, because there's so much else going on, and the pressures are at different moments. So
yeah, definitely. So which coach do you mentioned obviously Pep that you admire, but is there a specific someone in the game that you'd like to spend a few sessions just shadowing, just to get more insights into, like, and picking maybe different styles? Obviously, there's quite a lot of great coaches at the minute. Is there one specific you like? I'd love to kind of sit under his learning tree and kind of pick his brains a bit.
Wow, one specifically.
It doesn't have to be a specific one.
Probably De Zerbi.
Yeah,
at this moment.
He's done a fantastic job at Brighton, hasn't he?
And mainly because he'd be very different to me in terms of, like, culturally, where he grew up and the experience he's had up to now, coming to a foreign country. Whereas, I'm not saying I'm like all the other Premier League managers, by the way, far from it. But when they're more British, or they've been in Britain for an extended period of time, then they become more kind of like the norm in this country, and you start to see their trends a lot more. Whereas I think with De Zerbi, he's still quite fresh in, although he's been in a year or so, and he's the one that has kind of taken a style and probably taken it up a notch, or probably unfair to say up a notch from what Graham Potter did, because I think they would have been on that trajectory anyway, but he's changed something in there that's just given them something a little bit different. That's what I'd probably say.
They're playing fantastic football, for the last 18 months. They've got some results, haven't they? Brighton, and, they're going to be a safe Premier League side again for the future, for the 2, 3, 4 seasons.
I think the thing that's benefit Brighton as well, they've had a long-term vision. So right back to when they was playing at the with Dean, and they had Gus Poyet in charge, they always wanted to go for that fresh coach from outside the box, and they helped progress them through the divisions. They was in Division 3, and they've gone right up into the Premier League, and then they've kind of upgraded, improved. They remind me a little bit like Brentford as well, the recruitment style. Yep. They kind of they are constantly building, picking top coaches, and if you was outside of the coaching environment, and when you bring in someone like Roberto De Zerbi, a lot of people wouldn't have known him from the English game, and he's just come in and he's like kicked it on another level after selling a lot of their marquee players as well. They've lost a lot of players to Liverpool, Chelsea, and then they just keep on bringing in. It almost seems like a conveyor belt of talent. So I would be interested to see what goes into behind the the inner workings and how they identify players and stuff. So that's a good one.
I think alongside City, they've probably got the most ingrained style. And when I say ingrained, more in terms of all disciplines supporting that style of play. So even their data modelling, which they started when they were in the Football League all the way through, they've got a real idea of what they're looking for from a data perspective, as well as then coaching, sports science, and everything else that goes with it.
You can't just turn this on overnight, can you? This takes decades, I'd imagine.
And that's the hardest bit.
Yeah.
That's the hardest bit.
Time.
People want to do it until they realise a lot of the time what's involved, and then it's like, we'll scrap that now at the first hurdle.
Yeah.
And you have to go through so many difficulties, and they did. Even trying to get into the Premier League, they fell short when they arguably should have got promoted the year before they did.
Yeah.
When they were a long way clear at one point and then fell away, but they've also got a very good CEO there in Paul Barber, visionary in terms of approach, understands the game, which I think is really important, but also understands when to step away and allow other people to do their work. And he's been great since, and I shout out because since I've been out of like full-time work, he's always been available. And always given me time. So, I really appreciate that, as have other people, but he's always been really generous with his time and kind of support and guidance. So
great. Yeah. So just going back to your time at Rangers and specifically the Champions League campaign there, what a great experience I imagine that would be, travelling to all these great stadiums, Napoli, Ajax, Anfield. What you qualified? It was, that was brilliant for Rangers, but it was obviously a tough ask, wasn't it? After that point against those clubs. So just a bit of an insight into the experience for you, and as I say, going to those stadiums and then the challenge, and what did you learn, I guess, from that experience?
So bittersweet. Obviously, the sweet is that we qualified because we had to go through quite a difficult qualifying campaign. Yeah. And you see this year how difficult that was when you see like they played PSV again this year with a different outcome. And some would argue that this year's team's better. Some could argue that last year's team's better. Well, it doesn't really matter. But like to Cody Gakpo and them were in the side at the time. And on paper, they should really be getting through. PSV should be beating us. So I think that euphoria of that bit and the challenge, the tactical challenge there, and then you think you're getting somewhere because you qualify. But then when you realise, like when you step into that environment, and if there's one thing we could change, it would be something around that Champions League, about getting points in the Champions League. But at the same time, when you look at the group, you go actually, at that moment, Ajax were an established Champions League club and had been in the semi-final only a few years ago, spending considerable money. I think at that time it was around, you have to spend around 120 million over 5 years consecutively to finish third. Right. So that gives you an idea of how much these clubs are spending. And then you have Liverpool, 3 finals in 5 years. They don't need much of an introduction, even though they were a little bit off in Premier League terms last season. And then Napoli were arguably the most formed team.
It was the best Napoli side in the past 20 years, and went on to win the league as well. So
you could say that without the World Cup break, they arguably would have been favourites to win the Champions League, because at that time they were unbelievable. And I think the World Cup break actually killed them a little bit in terms of that momentum and rhythm. But when you're at a club like Rangers, all that goes out the window, because you're a club that has to win, and I get that. All the fans wanted you to do was win. There was nothing ever about going there to perform. It was about winning, and we weren't able to do that. So that will always be a huge regret in terms of that part. Yeah. But then what you realise is like the levelness of some of this is unbelievable. So you go to Anfield, and just the way it's little things that but it confirms for you. So like Jordan Henderson run the game. But he didn't run the game with what he did with the ball or without it. He did run the game by organising people. And when you speak to players afterwards that, played at the Premier League level as well, by the way, and then they see that and they play against players like that, they go, actually, we can see what he does and what we can take from that, because he literally bossed the game without needing to touch the ball in many ways, in terms of just organising those around him. So I think that was incredible seeing. You go to some of the best grounds, which we were fortunate to do. We went to some iconic places in terms of that. But those things you don't really think about in the moment. You don't, even now to a degree. I can't even remember too much about the stadiums and things, because you just don't. You just focus on what the job is, so you don't get to experience it in that way. But when you look back on it and you think about the clubs you played, of course, there's an element of pride there. But it's hard to feel pride when the performances or the results were where the results were, although there were key moments in every game. Yeah. And everyone will say this, of course, but like I always go back to first home game, Napoli. We have 2 or 3 very good chances and should be ahead, and we're on top. Then we get the red card. Then they miss the pen. Then they have another pen, and they score to go 1-0. And with 6 minutes to go, it's still 1-0, and we got 10 men. And then 2 silly errors, give the ball away on the edge of our own box, and those teams punish you. And that's the difference. Yeah. Where you maybe get away with some of that stuff in the SPL, it was like, and the Liverpool game at home will always stand out, because I think it was at 65 minutes, it was 1-1. We have a great chance, 2v1, and don't take it. Kanate slides in and wins it. They have almost the identical chance the other way. Firmino scores, and then they bring Salah, Robertson, Jota, and Thiago off the bench. And I remember looking across and saying to Pep Linders, come on. But that's the kind of, that's the level of it. That's where you want to be, and that's where they want to be. That's where they need to be as a club. But it's always, when you look back at it now, you've almost got to go through the bad experience, being the first ones to get back in the Champions League, to allow them to continue to build, and hopefully in the next few years they will consistently qualify. Well, if they win the league this year, then they qualify. So that's a good start point. But hopefully they can do that consistently, because that gives you the level of it, but also the financial aspect of it. It's so important for Scottish clubs.
Yeah, definitely.
It's huge.
Anything post, sort of like you said, in the heat of the moment, You can't really take it all in. Everything's going by so fast. Anything on reflection that you think you've learned that you would do differently again, or
it's
you do it as
the only one for me is, and I've always felt it anyway, but we probably adapted or tried to adapt to give the players a better chance to compete, or so we thought. Whereas, like, if I was to really be true to what I believe in, I would just go for it in the same way every game. Yeah. And that could have led to big defeats, but then we ended up with big defeats anyway so like Liverpool was our biggest one, and at home we went for it and went 1-0 up and was well in the game and doing okay, and then obviously within minutes it can just come crashing the other way. So I think it's hard to know exactly, because the bit when you try to change, you have to have a certain amount of players that can adapt to change in that way, and unless you're some of the bigger squads in the world, you don't really get that. So I think it's hard. Sometimes, and Rangers fans will hate me for saying it, they'll probably hammer me for saying it, but sometimes you have to accept where you are. And at that moment in time, we weren't at the same level as Liverpool in terms of the players that they had in their squad, the way the club had been in so many Champions Leagues consecutively and finals and competing at the top end. We just weren't at the same level as them. Does that mean we could have performed better? Yeah, of course we could have. And there'll always be some things around that. But would we still have lost games? Probably. And I can hear them now. They'll be like, defeatist mindset and all that. But sometimes it's just reality, right?
Yeah. Liverpool are not easy. You can't over Liverpool.
And the players gave everything.
It's
players level.
Players gave everything. Yeah. And what we also had, which you can't discount, is the number of injuries picked up from playing at that level. And they were injuries sustained in games, not training. So you're asking, like Connor Goldson is one of the standouts for me. Been a real stalwart for Rangers. Top player, was really, really important to us. Got injured chasing Nunez in the Channel at Ibrox, because he had to do that maybe 6 or 7 times in half an hour, where he might do that twice in a game at most in the SPL on the weekend.
That's a great point, yeah.
So just those things that they're not usually expected to do at the intensity that they have to do them at can cause injury, because you're almost like, how do you're training players to play a Champions League game that's the opposite of what we get in the SPL. SPL, we are at 80% of the ball most weeks, except for when you play 1 or 2 sides. Yeah. Teams sit really deep against you, so that even the movement patterns, everything that they have to do, the mindset of how they see the game, and then all of a sudden you play against Liverpool, they win the ball, they turn you round, and you're running back towards your own goal every time you lose it. That is a very different game.
Used to a style of play.
Being able to cope with that is not easy. And so we ended up with 13 first-team players injured. And then they go, it's because of what you're doing in training. No, mate, because we didn't have enough time to train. We were literally recovering and playing again. It was condensed because of the World Cup, of course. Yeah. So we played every second, third day. That's what it was for us. So we didn't get the time to rest fully, get good work into them to go again. It was always trying to do it on the run, which is the nature of the beast, right? And that's why you're in those top tournaments.
Yeah, top end,
definitely. And that's it for this time, guys. Don't forget, if you enjoyed our content, please drop us a like. It helps support the channel. And if you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button to help support us, and leave a comment in the comment section below. But that's it for this time, guys. Join us next time on part 2, where we'll be talking to Ceri about the current game and all things Rangers and part of his scouting network and other topics as well. So that's it for this time, guys. Have a world-class weekend, and we'll catch you next time.